As you all know, on October the 23rd, myself and three other co-workers left the United States for a trip to Sierra Leone, West Africa. And we went there mainly to work in the city of Bo, which you see circled on the map. And this is, I think, this is my fourth trip. I think it's David's sixth or seventh, and Andy's eighth or ninth. I don't know. Those guys have been going several times. It was Jessica's second. But we've been going here, and you've been hearing me talk about the work. You heard me before we left talk about getting ready to go, and I wanted to talk about it now that I've gone and share with you some things. You can see from that little green dot on the map there that Sierra Leone is a pretty small country. It actually can fit into the state of Illinois, such a small nation. Its population, however, has been growing somewhat. We're now up to over 8 million people in the nation of Sierra Leone, and in the area of Bo, where we're concentrating our work, there's over 250,000 people living in that area. Sierra Leone is, at least at this point, the way I can discover it or research it, seems to be about the third poorest nation in all the world. And you and I have no idea just what that looks like. It's really, really hard. I remember the very first time I ever went to Sierra Leone back in 2013, excuse me. I thought I'd prepared myself for what I was going to see, and I could not believe the poverty when I actually saw it in real life. And it's made a difference in me, and it's just something that I think causes me to appreciate so much more the fact that I live in a country where we have so many conveniences and so many things that make our country great and easy to live in. I worry about that because sometimes I'm afraid that we have so many comforts that those comforts distract us from serving the Lord, and they who are so poor, because they have nothing really else to live for, they do have a better sight and idea about the eternal and longing for something better that we don't have. What I wanted to do this morning was wanted to talk to you a little bit about the trip that we made and share with you some things. I've done this before on previous trips, and it's not going to be a lot different than those other times, but I want to do that again. And I do that because it's not without biblical precedent. You remember when the Apostle Paul and Barnabas, they went on their first preaching trip in Acts chapter 13 and 14, and they came back to Antioch from where they had started. And it says in verse 26, from there they sailed to Antioch. This is Acts 14, verse 26. Probably put that text up on the board. Acts 14, verse 26. From there they sailed to Antioch, from which they had been committed to the grace of God for the work which they had accomplished. And when they had arrived and gathered the church together, they began to report all things that God had done with them and how he had opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. And so they came back from this trip and they told them about what they'd done. And in fact, in chapter 15 and verse 3, as they go to Jerusalem for a special reason, we won't get into the context there necessarily, but in verse 3, therefore, they being sent on their way by the church, they were passing through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and were bringing great joy to all of them. So what I'm saying to you is that I want to talk to you a little bit about the trip that I made, tell you a little bit about some of the things we were able to do and accomplish. And I believe that that's in keeping with what the apostles did when they made trips like that, preach the gospel. So let me share some of those things. I want to clear up one thing very quickly, because most of you know that my father is in South Africa, and the question is often asked when I go to Sierra Leone, did you get to see your dad? Of course, my dad is still not well. He's obviously, he's 91 and lives in Johannesburg, South Africa, and is in a memory care facility. He's suffering from dementia pretty badly. And I know that Bonnie and well, at least Raymond and his brother-in-law Brian, they went to see the preacher, and the preacher doesn't know who they are. So It's kind of sad. But anyway, question is, since you're in Africa, are you going to get to stop off and see your dad? Well, that's over 3,000 miles by air to get to where my dad is living. And so, no, it's not possible that I was able to see him, but I just wanted to clear that up for you right at first. I would love to see my dad again, and maybe I will get that opportunity at some point in the future, but not right now. So let me tell you a little bit about the work that we did while we were there. We left on October the 23rd, and we got back on the 13th. That would have been not this past Monday, but the Monday before. I've only been back 2 weeks and trying to get reorganized. But let me first of all introduce you to who all went. There were 4 of us who left from the United States. There was Andy Dieselkamp. His daughter Jessica went with us this year. This is her second trip there. And then David Dieselkamp, Andy's cousin, of course, my good friend Andy and David. Both of those are real good friends of mine. And then myself. And then once we got there, we were joined for a little while by Sunday Ayandare, who came over from Nigeria. And he spent a few days with us. And then a few days later, some other guys came, Rennie Frazier and Sid Latham. And the 3 of those guys then went over to a place called Culhan, which is about a 2-hour trip from Bo, and they spent some time working up in that area. And so the 4 of us were focused in Bo, and those 3 guys were up in a different area, over in a different area from where we were. When I think about Sierra Leone and talk a little bit about it, I think it's important that we recognize that it's a beautiful country. There are all sorts of wonderful things to see there. It's beautiful countryside. The first picture there is a picture of the Siwa River, which is just south of Bo, runs between just south of Kokofile, a little town right outside of Bo. And it's a beautiful little river. It's kind of a dirty river. It runs pretty full right after the rainy season, which is when we arrived. Sometimes it gets pretty shallow in the dry season. I understand. I've never actually seen it in the dry season, but there's some beautiful things to see. Mountains, grasslands, there are palm trees. You can see there's even bananas, sometimes banana trees. You see those kinds of things. So it's a beautiful place to see, but there are sometimes when you're in Sierra Leone, there are some things you'll see that you won't typically see in the United States. For example, you won't see some of this kind of thing happening. I don't know if you can tell it or not, but there's a guy standing just to the left of that orange part of the truck up there, and he's got a stick that he's holding, and he's pushing that electrical wire up and holding it up so that the truck can come under that. This is downtown Bo, in the city of Bo. And in the orange shirt there in the front, that's me on the back of a motorcycle getting ready to go through that narrow spot. But anyway, you don't typically see that kind of thing in the States. You don't typically see people piling up things on their vans like this. These are cans of palm oil that is kind of something that they produce a lot of over there. Here are guys, again, loading up. We don't see that kind of thing going down our roads, people on top of a van like that as they're driving down the road. That van is about to get moving there. You often come across in the middle of the road, some vehicle is broken down and it's got to be fixed, and they're working on it right there in the middle of the road. This was an interesting thing. It's the first time I've ever seen them trying to play volleyball over there. They're trying to get a volleyball net up, and they've got this ladder leaned up against a post, and the one guy's trying to hold it. But again, that wouldn't pass OSHA or whatever our safety standards are. This is a house that's been in the process of being made. Look at the scaffolding that is erected to build this place. Gives you an idea of the kind of conditions in which people work under those places. And there is your friend preacher Rick Ligon crossing a little river, a little creek in town on a very nice, attractive bridge there. Those are not the kinds of things we see in the United States, but they're interesting things, and there are things that like that all over the place. While we were there, of course, we do a lot of walking. Walk in many of the places that we go. We spend a lot of time walking on different paths and roads and other places together and alone and different things like that. And of course, it's very hot. It's in the 90s usually in Sierra Leone, and so we drink a lot of water. And of course, we can't drink water out of the tap over there. It will make us sick. We have to even brush our teeth with bottled water that we buy. When we take a shower, cold shower, by the way, and then we don't have hot water. When we take a cold shower, you have to keep your mouth closed. so that you don't get water in your mouth. And yes, Connie, I can keep my mouth closed that long. I can do that, but so we have to buy our own water, and of course that involves going to the store and picking it up and going to some little shop or kiosk to buy some of the water and bringing it home. But maybe the best way of getting around over there is not by walking. I mean, that's the way you do, and you do a lot of that, and it's hot and tiring. But one of the nicer ways to get around is through what they call motorcycle taxis, and they're on many places. There are some pretty good roads that we ride on as we ride on motorcycle taxis. It's interesting what you will see on a motorcycle taxi. I was behind a motorcycle taxi that guy in front of me had a bundle of maybe 6 or 8 pieces of 8-foot long rebarb. Rebarb, you know what rebarb is, metal rebarb. He's got it on the back and it's on both sides, and I'm thinking, man, he's going to take out people on both sides, but they do that kind of thing. They put all sorts of things on motorcycles. There's Jessica riding on a motorcycle. She actually brought a helmet with her. Actually, she borrowed one, I think, from the Reiches. You'll notice that David and Andy are riding double with the taxi driver. That often is the way that people go, and Jessica and her father were riding there that way. 3 people on a motorcycle is pretty normal. Sometimes you'll see as many as 4 or 5 on one motorcycle. It's amazing. But anyway, that's kind of the indication or the situation. That's how we go most of the time is on motorcycle. And typically on the road, on the main roads, it's not too bad. But when you get off of the roads, oh, by the way, one of the nice things about motorcycle riding is, as hot as it is, once in a while it's kind of get nice when you've just been sweating up a lot to get on a motorcycle and ride. And you can't see it in the picture. This guy's looking at me. The guy standing there is looking at me on the back of that motorcycle because I got my hands out and I'm just trying to get a little bit cooled off, trying to get a little cool as we have, just come from Kokafile and preaching in a very hot circumstance. But anyway, that's one of the nice things about taxi driving. It's interesting because the taxi drivers, because they're on their motorcycles all day long and they're not used to, they like hot weather, they're usually bundled up pretty good. And I think you may have seen that in you see these jackets that these guys are wearing because they get cold on the motorcycle. I don't quite get it, but they do. So I guess it's kind of like we sometimes aren't too bad with the cold weather here. We don't like the hot weather sometimes. But of course, when you get off of the roads, it can get kind of bad because the roads are pretty messed up, especially when there's been rain coming. It tends to dig ruts and things like that in the roads, and that makes it very difficult to ride on a motorcycle taxi. At least it makes it uncomfortable. You're jostling around quite a bit, especially when you get off the road and off the main roads onto the roads that are throughout the neighborhoods and that sort of thing. Most of the roads around there are dirt roads, and we go. But that's the way we get around while we're there, and it's not too bad. We stay, of course, at a place called the Imperial Hotel, and I'm not going to show you a lot of things with regard to the Imperial Hotel. This is David and I pulling up to our hotel on the back of motorcycles. One of the things is right outside the front of the motel is a little place where we often sit. This is where we sit in the morning, and this is where we typically have a lot of time together. In the evenings, we eat inside at a little area that's inside one of the hotel buildings. But in the daytime, in the mornings especially, we usually have our breakfast there in front of that hotel, like I was showing you just a minute ago. It's also the place where we do a lot of our planning, and we sit there and think about what we're going to do today. In fact, I will tell you that Andy is the keeper of the brain. If you notice that little book he has in his hand, that's what we call our brain. And we all try to keep our schedule in that book so we all know who's doing what, when, where, and how. And that he is the keeper of the brain. So we always go to Andy and say, hey, he's kind of the mama of the group. And he wouldn't like me saying that, but I don't care. But he takes care of us in that way, and so we do our planning there. But it's also a place where we have a lot of our Bible studies are just right there, especially if we're having people come to meet us at the hotel. It's out there in front of the hotel there. It's where we do that. There are a couple of American families that are living there, two young couples. On far side is Sean and Abby Reich, and on the other side is Dan and Sonia Kane. They moved there in about 2020, and they're living there now. I talk about more than one person on a motorcycle. You'll see that the Canes have two daughters right now, and they travel this way on most of the time when the whole family goes. They've now acquired a pickup truck that they're using because Sonia's getting ready to have their third child. These families have put themselves at great risk to live there. They're trying to just sort of live like the Sierra Leoneans do to some extent, with some things that are nicer for themselves, but typically they try to do things the way that they are. They've tried to get into this. All of them know how to speak Creole now. They do pretty well at that, which is the language of the people. But they struggle with health issues sometimes. When they first moved there, they had Eden, but then they found out that they were pregnant, and so they then had Epaphra. After they got there, they actually had Epaphra in their home. Her mother came to help her have the baby. And now they have a third child, and they were going to have the baby born in Freetown, at a hospital in Freetown. But I need to let you know that they've just found out that Sonia, the baby she's carrying, which she's supposed to have in December, that baby may have some heart issues. And so they're making plans to come back this week to the United States because they simply can't take care of a child. They don't have neonatal care and things like that. And so if the baby does have some heart issues, they're concerned about that. So they're going to come back to the States and have the baby. So really would encourage you to please keep them in your prayers, and that the baby will be okay, and that they can have the baby without difficulty, and that will not affect their ability to live in Sierra Leone, because they do have to live with health issues there. While we were there, Dan had his 13th, he had malaria for the 13th time. I've had malaria once or twice when I was a kid, but living in Central Africa, but I don't remember what it's like. But it's not a fun thing. And I talked to one of the members there, who's a guy named Frank Raphael. I'll introduce you to him in just a minute. But I asked Frank, I said, how many times do you get malaria? How often do you get malaria? And he says, at least once every 6 months. Twice a year, usually I get malaria. And it's something that they have to deal with that we don't have to deal with. They sleep under nets and that sort of thing, but they still have to deal with that. And so I'd really encourage you to appreciate them and the sacrifices they're making. Sean and Abby do not yet have children. I think they would like to have some children, but they don't want, they want to be able to have children and yet continue their work in Sierra Leone. So please continue to remember them. These guys are doing great work over there. For many years, we were going over there to Sierra Leone, and we were preaching. People were going and preaching since the early 2000s or so, going over there preaching and converting people. And then many of those people, because the Americans left and went home, a lot of those people fell away because there was nobody to continue working with them. Sean and Abby and Dan and Sonia are doing great work there with the churches in that area, and there's much more stability in the churches now as a result of their living there. So please keep them in your prayers and think about them as days go ahead. Especially think about the Canes in regard to their child that's getting ready to be born. Primarily, while we were there, we worked primarily with two local congregations. That was the Kindiama Road Church in Bow. They are not actually meeting right now in their regular meeting house or their regular meeting place. They have a little awning over the side of a house that they rent, and they usually worship under there. But in the rainy season, it's very difficult. And for some reason, the rainy season has extended a little bit now. And so during the rainy season, they've been worshiping in the front, in the little porch area of the Cain's house. And so that's where they're actually still meeting, because there's still quite a bit of rain going on at this time. It was more rain this time than it's ever been in the past times that I've been there. And so that's where they're meeting. This is a really good church. I've got lots of good things I'd like to share with you about these people. But then the other congregation we've been working with is the church in Cocofile, and I show you the above picture because that's their building that they've recently built and it's completed. And this is the inside of the building, the second picture there. There are not very many windows in the building, 2 windows only and 1 door. And so there's not a lot of air moving in there. And so a lot of times we're out front, especially when it's nicer weather under the trees for our Bible studies. But that's the little Cocofila church. And we'll talk a little bit about all these Christians as we go through here. Let me just let you meet some of the people in the church at Bow. I think probably one of the guys who's been a Christian there longer than anybody is a guy by the name of Frank Raphael. He's about his early 50s. He's a really good man, been a strong Christian for years, the kind of guy that has grown. And I have, because I've been going since 2013, I've seen the maturity that's come in Frank, and he's one of the guys that they lean on the most. Frank is a little fella. You can see him in this picture. He's a guy who was born, suffered from polio when he was a child, and so he wears braces on his legs, and he walks with crutches everywhere he goes. But he does not miss services. He does not miss Bible studies. He is an active member, and he's one of the guys that people really rely on. I have great confidence in him. He has a little kiosk that he sells things at, and that's how he makes a living. And then there's another older brother by the name of Philip Sawi, who's actually 1 year older than me. He's 66, and I'm 65, which is interesting because there are not usually very many people older than me in Sierra Leone. At least this year, there haven't been. So mid-60s is where a lot of people are beginning. But Philip is a great man. He's very spiritually mature, very knowledgeable of Scripture, very wise. And the two, Frank and Philip, the younger guys don't do a whole lot without first running it past Philip and Frank, because they have a lot of confidence in their leadership. This is probably one of the most capable men that I know of in Sierra Leone. His name is Francis Mau. And Francis is he speaks really good English. He was born and raised as a Muslim. He ultimately converted to Catholicism and began to study his Bible and realized that there are not things in his Bible that he realized. So 2016, he became a Christian. And he is the guy who does a lot of the translation for us. He's probably the translator between him and George Mamalu, who I'll mention to you. Those are the two guys that I have the greatest confidence in regard to their translation abilities. But this guy's a really good Bible student all on his own. I studied with him one Sunday afternoon, and I studied some things that were really challenging. He fell right in with those and got those, picked up on them very well. And I said, next time we get together, you need to teach me. And he said he would do that. And so he actually did that. And the little thing that he's there, he taught Andy and I from the book of Philippians, and he really got the book of Philippians well, and he had some illustrations for us as we were working through that book together. And he did just a great job. Really appreciate Francis. And then, of course, one of the younger guys that I really like too is a guy by the name of James Conte. James is a really good guy. He's a hard worker. He's becoming a good translator, but he's also just a really good Bible student. I don't know. I think probably of everybody that was there in the church, James probably studied with us more than anybody else because he just is thirsty to know Scripture. He's with his grandmother. He lives with his grandmother. She's not a Christian. She's a member of the Methodist Church. But this is them sitting in front of their house. And James is a really good guy who I have a lot of confidence in. And then you remember we've often talked about Muhammad and Muhammad Masakoi. Well, Muhammad got married. He's married a lady by the name of Lucy. And she is a very, very good and godly woman and is doing a very servant-oriented lady. And we're just very happy about their marriage and the work that they're doing there in Sierra Leone. The other congregation is the church in Cocofile. Cocofile is a little village outside of Bow. And the guy who works there is a guy named Peter Kindema. He's supported to preach. I think the church in Aurora supports him. This is a guy that David taught on his first trip in 2012, taught the gospel to. And he became a Christian, and he is now serving the Lord. His wife is Ami. They have some children because both he and Ami were married and widowed, and now this is a second marriage for both of them because they both lost their first mates to death. And so she had a daughter. That oldest girl, Christine, is their daughter, is her daughter, and then there's Rose, and August is great young man. He's 18 now, and he's doing really well in the gospel. Very good Christian. And then they have several others. The little girl with the blue and white dress is the girl named Robin. She was named after Robin Disselkamp. And then the little girl there is Priscilla. She was the little girl that got burned. I don't know if you remember me telling you about this quite a long time ago, that she got burned with some hot boiling water splattered on her, and she was burned. But I could not tell any scarring or anything like that. So she's doing well. And then they have a little boy named Josiah, or Jeremiah. Excuse me, he's Jeremiah. This is the outside the front of their house. Just people gathering there. And then I've showed you last time I've showed you Ami's kitchen. Ami has kind of a new kitchen now. It's a different kind of a kitchen. Instead of it being a kind of a teepee or something, it's now she has a mud kitchen out front of her house, and it's kind of neat for her to be able to have that nicer kitchen. And then one of the members there is a guy named George Mamalu. I've mentioned him before. George is a guy that I've had confidence in for a long time. Very capable, very good Bible student, very, very intelligent fella. And he just does a lot of good things, and especially in his translation work as we're there, he helps us a lot with that. One of the things that the church at Cocofield does every Saturday afternoon is they gather for song practice, and they go over the songs that they're going to sing the next day in worship. So it's kind of a neat little thing that they do together. One of the things that I wanted to tell you about is we did get a little bit of time. I said we primarily work with the church in Bow and the church in Cocofield, but about an hour and 10 minutes up the road is a city called Jala, and that's a university town. And this is where Abraham and Emma Charles live. Abraham is somebody that I met. He was unmarried when we first met him in 2013. He's now married to Emma. She's a wonderful lady. And they have two children, Josiah and Abigail. I will tell you that this was the first time, Abigail's 3, Josiah's 5. This was the first time that Abigail was able to stand in the presence of us guys from America. Typically when she saw us, she would run because she didn't see very many white people, whom we they call us, white men. And so she was kind of frightened, but now she's kind of gotten used to us, and so she was able to do that. But Abraham is a really good guy, and you know him from probably, I said Francis was one of the most capable guys in Bow, but Abraham is probably one of the most capable. I put him up next to anybody in the United States, just about. I mean, he's just a really good Bible student, a very good man. He moved to start work in Jala because his mother, who he did not grow up with, his father had taken him away from his mother when he was a child. He did not grow up with her, but he heard about her and went and met her, and she became a Christian. She lived in Jala, and she became a Christian. And so he went and started to work there in the city of Jala, and the congregation there is really doing quite well. They have their own building, and it's completed now, and they worship in it, and it's really a good group. One of the things I should tell you about Abraham, you know that when we were there in 2021, Abraham had a motorcycle accident. He had gotten a motorcycle which he was using to travel on. He had a motorcycle accident and really broke up his arm very, very badly. He had to have 2 surgeries, and one was done in Nigeria, and another one was done, a follow-up surgery was done in Freetown. And to look at him, you would not see that he doesn't have use of his arm, but he's very limited with the use of his arm. He's not allowed to pick up things very heavy, and so he can't pick up his kids with his left arm, but he says his right arm is now getting very, very strong because of it. The second surgery has really helped him with the pain that the first surgery was trying to relieve, but didn't relieve at all. And he's really doing much better now with that and able to continue his work without interference of that. But these are good people, and I was able to spend some time with them in their home while I was there in Sierra Leone, and so did Andy and David. We went on separate trips, but were able to get together. Of course, the purpose of our trip was not to see people riding around on motorcycles or odd things in the country. It's just kind of interesting to see those things. We went there for the purpose, of course, was to teach the Bible. And that's what we did, all the time. We had studies with individuals. We had studies with groups. We had group studies with the church. We had individual studies with individual Christians in the church. We had studies with people that we were able to make contact with on the street. Guy that I studied, one of the guys I studied with was a guy by the name of, anyway, John was his first name. But anyway, John was a taxi driver, motorcycle taxi driver. And a lot of times these guys, when they talk to you on the taxi, you know, they're just kind of wanting to know if they can get to America somehow. In fact, I had one taxi driver who wanted to meet with me, and he met with me only to find out that what he was really interested in was could I help him pay for his rent, you know, on his house. And but this guy John came and we studied very well. He did not return a second time, but we had a good Bible study with him. He really was sincere. We had a lot of studies. One of the things that we were asked to do by both the churches, well, the church at Bow was the church that presented it first. They wanted us to come and teach them the prophets. And so throughout their 3-week period, except for Sunday afternoons, we had a study at 3 o'clock with the Cocophilly group. And then we had at 5 o'clock, we met and had a study did the same study again with the church in Bow. And that study went great. I mean, these are people, the churches in Bow especially, they really seem to grasp things a lot better. You got to understand, these are folks who, in a little tiny country, who have never lived, many of them have never been outside of their country. They've certainly never been off the continent of Africa. And they have very limited worldview. And yet they're learning about a little place called Palestine and all of these things that happen in the Old Testament covenant and the coming of Jesus as prophesied in the Old Testament. And God's dealing with Israel and dealing with Judah and dealing with the nations around. And that's what the prophets are all about. And they were getting it. They were getting it. And it was really, it was so incredible. You got to understand, a lot of these people don't speak English very well. They speak they all have their own tribal language. Mende and Kissi are the two tribes primarily in the area that we were in. But they have their own language, which is called Creole, which is a very simplified kitchen kind of English. And a lot of them don't read, and if they do read, they don't read well. And yet they're learning things. You have to teach them things. This guy, for example, in the kind of colorful shirt there to the right, to James Conti's left, is a guy named Smart. And Smart is a guy who is a pretty sharp fellow, but he doesn't speak English. He only speaks Creole. Everything has to be done through translation with him. And so we oftentimes were doing that, but we just kept teaching Bible classes as much as we could, because that's really what we were there to do. There's Brother Smart. He's the guy with his hand by his head. Really some good people who are trying hard to learn. I'll just share with you a kind of a funny thing is that when we were in Cocophilly, oftentimes we had visitors to our Bible studies. This gentleman and his wife came frequently, but on one particular day, he was making lots of comments during the Bible study, and it was interfering somewhat with, Andy would start to say something, and the rooster would crow and really loud, and we'd have to kind of stop and let the sound get away, and then we'd get back to the study. So that was kind of an interesting thing that happened. It's one of the things that you put up with. This is Priscilla, and she was fascinated with my hair, my white hair. She's fascinated with my white skin. Whenever you walk through town somewhere, you always are hearing all the little kids go, "Pum wee, pum wee, pum wee." That's their word for white man. And they come running up to us, and they want to bump fists with us or touch, they want to touch us, or they want a handshake or something like that. And it's just fascinating for them because they just don't see too many white people. And she not only was interested in the fact that I was white with my skin, but my hair is very white. And I'm teaching, and I can feel these little fingers running through my hair as she's trying to check that out. And that's kind of interesting. But that's what we were doing, was just teaching the gospel to people. Most of our work was focused with Christians already, trying to establish them, but we did have a number of studies with non-Christians, and hopefully some of those contacts are being followed up with by Dan and Sean. Jessica was there, and she did some wonderful work with, first of all, with the children. She was really did a really good job. While we were having the study with the adults, she would have the kids over to the side studying with them, teaching them things. Jessica is already trying to learn Creole, and so I mean these little kids don't understand English; they have to speak Creole, and she's trying to speak to them and teach them. And you can hear them over there, and they're learning these songs, and you hear these familiar songs, and they're singing these songs, and they're learning Bible facts. And it's just a wonderful thing. And then Jessica also did some really good work with the women there in Sierra Leone. Some of the women up here, Lucy is Mohammed's wife. Rosalind is one of the members of the Church of Cocophilia, as well as Selena. And then, of course, there's Sonia and Abby. And they were teaching women's classes and doing that kind of thing. And she was just very invaluable. I remember on my very first trip to Sierra Leone, because Sierra Leone is a kind of male-dominated society, the women don't get a lot involved. But I remember on our first trip, there was the women in the church were begging for us to bring women, American women, over to teach them. And, Candy and Robin and Karen would have loved to have gone, but they're all older and have things that make it very difficult for them to be over there. And so it was wonderful that Jessica, she's single and in her early 30s. And she just did wonderful work. She's very knowledgeable. That's Andy's daughter. And we appreciate the work that she did while she was with us. We also worked on the radio on Thursday of every week. One of us was at the radio. I went the first time. Andy went the second time. I think David went the third time. We preach for an hour. We just get on the radio and preach. I preached a lesson in which I was trying to aim at the Muslim faith and try to deal with helping them understand that Christ had to come and redeem us from sin. They have a problem with the idea of ransom in the Muslim faith, and we were trying to talk about some things with regard to that. But it's kind of hard to get to the radio station. There's a really hard ride getting there, and then once you get there, this is a very steep climb up a hill to get there. And of course, there's a radio station, and it's extremely hot in there. There's no air conditioning there's no air moving in there, nothing. And you're just in this room, soundproof room, and you're trying to preach for an hour, and it's kind of interesting. But that is something. Muhammad has a radio program every Thursday. He does the radio broadcast there and trying to reach out to people with the gospel. We also did something interesting too. David has had some contact with some people in Liberia. Of course, Peter Kendama is actually a Liberian himself. And we had some contact, and David and I actually talked about before we went the possibility of taking 1 week and going to Liberia, which is the next country over next to Sierra Leone. We thought about maybe trying to spend a week there and just see what the possibilities were for the gospel over there. But instead of doing that, we decided it was going to be too expensive and too time consuming. And so we ended up having a couple of brothers come and work with us. So Jimmy Zulu came, and he's a preacher there in one of the congregations in Bo, or in Sierra Leone, or in Liberia, in the city of Monrovia. And the guy Patrick Timba is actually Peter Kendama's brother. And we spent a lot of time studying with them. I don't know what they were there for 3 days, and we spent a lot of time studying with them, just trying to figure out where they were in terms of Scripture, what they understood Scripture taught. And there's a strong influence of institutionalism with these groups and with the church in Liberia. And so we're not sure exactly what's going to happen, what might happen, but we may at some point in the future. I don't know. We're just talking. Maybe we'll go to Liberia for a week or something. I don't know. But we're going to see. But it was very interesting to work with these guys and try to help them. In the time that we were there, typically we obviously, I said we spent most of our time working with Christians there, because that's really what we're trying to do, is strengthen the Christians. It's like Doug was talking about in our Bible class this morning. People are baptized, but then they rise to walk in oldness of life, and then they end up losing those people. And now we're actually trying to keep some of those people and work. The last couple of times we've been, our work has been mostly focused on trying to stabilize
Christians who are there. Well, one of the things that happened so we didn't have a lot of baptisms this time. There was only 2 baptisms while we were there. And the first baptism we really didn't have anything to do with. These 3 guys are brothers. Peter Kendama is the guy over here, and then Patrick is the older brother, and Thomas is the younger brother. And Thomas was not a Christian. And I wanted to just tell you about this guy's baptism just because I think it's a neat story. We really didn't have a lot to do with teaching Thomas, but because Dan Kane and Peter's oldest son, Augustus, was teaching, Thomas would have been Augustus' uncle. Augustus is 18, and Thomas wanted to obey the gospel. And so they found a place where they could baptize him. It was a place where they quarry out sand for sand that they use in their mud buildings, or sometimes use in the concrete that they build as they make bricks and that sort of thing. And it had filled with water, and so there was water standing in it just below Dan's knee, so just about knee deep. And Dan tried to get Augustus to baptize his uncle, but Augustus said, no, I've never done that before. He was too nervous to do that. So Dan went ahead and baptized him. And I tell you the story because this was a very, very muddy place. The water that he was baptized in, I mean, you couldn't see. When they stepped in it, you couldn't see their feet. I mean, it was just that muddy. But he was baptized, and what was so neat about it is that when came up, so thankful to be a Christian and so thankful to have his sins washed away, and he hugged Dan, and then Dan hugged him back, and then he stepped out. Dan stepped out of the place where the water was onto the ground, and Thomas noticed that his feet were all muddy, that Dan's feet were all muddy, and just automatically, without even thinking, he began to take that water from the place and wash Dan's feet. And I think the symbolism of that is so neat, that his very first act as a child of God was to wash somebody's feet. I'm hoping for good things for Thomas. We were called to have a Bible study. The 2 guys on either end of the bench, one is Junior in the kind of yellowy shirt. The other guy is Kebby. They were Junior. I don't know if you remember, but Junior was baptized in 2021 when we went there. I studied with him and a little lady named Hawa right outside this same place. This is Kebby's house. And the man who wanted to study was a guy who was a Muslim and had begun to doubt Muslim faith and began to see Jesus as maybe the true prophet of God. And so a study was set up for me and him, with George is the guy with the white pants on. He's the guy who did the translating for us, and he's a great Bible student as well. And so we studied with him. It was on a Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock was when we had the study scheduled. I had another study at 5:30. So Andy went with me. He wasn't tied up, so he went with me in case it went long and I could come back for my Bible study. Well, it turns out that after studying with him for a little over an hour, he wanted to obey the gospel. His name is Alpha. And so they took him down to the Siwa River, and George baptized him into Christ. And so we have a new brother. His name is Alpha. And I was not able to be there because I had to rush back for the other Bible study at 5:30. But Andy was able to see it. He was the one who got the pictures. And so we're so thankful that Alpha is a Christian. The thing that I want you to realize is that the teaching that we did, again, was not focused primarily on evangelism. We did a lot of that. We did quite a bit of teaching of people who were not Christians. We studied with denominational preachers. We studied with a local doctor there a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. We studied with a local doctor there. It was from Nigeria, but part of a major denomination that's very popular in the country. It's actually even a world-renowned denomination that started in Nigeria by a Nigerian preacher. But a lot of those studies didn't pan out with anything. But we keep studying with people and hope that others can pick up where we left off. And we've left their names and contact information. But we focus mostly on trying to work with the Christians. And it's paying off dividends, I think, because these young Christians are becoming more and more mature. And it's just a thrill to see them growing the way they are. So even though we didn't have a lot of baptisms, we still did a lot of teaching, and we did a lot of teaching of Christians who were already trying to strengthen them. And we have to keep remembering that our job is not to convert people. Our job is to preach the word. And we did a lot of that. I would say that between Andy and I and David, the three of us each averaged 3 to 4 Bible studies every day. Each one of us. Sometimes we could study things together, but many times we were separated, and we did a lot of teaching. Every day was involved in that kind of stuff. And that was the work that we did. The last Sunday, of course, I had been, David and Andy had taught and preached in the Bow Church the last Sunday. The first 2 Sundays, David and Andy, the first 2 weeks, David and Andy were spending a lot of time in Kokopile trying to work with some problems that we were trying to help the group there work through. And so they were both preaching and teaching in Kokopile the first 2 Sundays as well. And I preached in Bow. Actually, Sunday preached the first Sunday in Bow, and I taught the Bible class. And then the last Sunday of the month, David and Andy taught in Bow, and I preached in Kokopile. Of course, we had to get back to the hotel as quickly as we could that Sunday afternoon because it was we were getting ready to come home. Andy had long already said earlier in the week the horse is headed for the barn, which meant we were all ready to come home. I think I talked a little bit about that last week. So we had to load up and make the 4-hour trip to Lungi, which is the place where the Freetown Airport is. We made that trip to Lungi, and ultimately our flight left that evening at about 7:15. We traveled to Brussels, where we had a layover. We were pretty tired, as that was the case, but ultimately we were able to fly back to the United States, and our flight actually landed an hour early. Got through passport checks and visa or customs easier than I'd ever done before. I don't know what the deal was, but we were able to do it, and I do it without a smartphone, but I need to get a smartphone. But anyway, we were finally able to get back with Candy and Robin, and so we were reunited and we were able to come home that day, and that was the trip that we took. And so that kind of gives you an overview of some of the things we were trying to do while we were there. Mostly just preaching and teaching, preaching and teaching, preaching and teaching. And it's a fun experience. It's a different and difficult experience, but it makes me appreciate getting back home and getting back here with you. But I really appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to let me go do this kind of thing. And I think last week, as we were talking, I think Wes led a prayer in which he said something about the way we have a kingdom vision. And that's what we have to have, brothers and sisters. We have to have a vision for the kingdom of God. I want the gospel to go in the city of Peoria a lot. We want to be a light here that shines and that shares the gospel with other people. But we need to recognize that we are part of something really big. We're part of the kingdom of God, and that spans across the world. And it's not just our neighbors around us who need the gospel. There are places where it's hard for people to go, and so if someone can go and we can send them, then that's a good thing for us to do, because they can go and preach the gospel in some of these places. And I appreciate so very much your willingness to let me go and help me go do that. Just now for the 4th time. I don't know what future will hold. We never make any plans about the next year until next year, but we'll see what next year holds. But I appreciate very much that fact. We are celebrating this weekend something that we Americans call Thanksgiving. And guess what? That's not an international holiday. That is an American holiday. And it is a holiday in which we remember the bounty that we enjoy as people who live in this country, going back to the colonial days or the time of the Pilgrims. And we really do have a lot of things to be thankful. But I would suggest that the thing that we have the greatest thanks for to God about is not just the material things that we have, but the spiritual blessings that we enjoy, one of which is the joy of getting to tell people the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you've never known what it's like to sit across the table from somebody and teach them the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to see them respond in a way that is positive, they want to follow the Lord. They want to put him on, and they want to rise and walk in newness of life. And then to see somebody like that who you've helped know the gospel, to share the gospel with, help them to grow. You've missed out on a great blessing if you've not been able to enjoy that opportunity. That's our privilege, though, as the people of God. I had Ron read for you from Psalm 105. There's something that happens in Psalm 105. It happens also in Psalm 9. And I want to share that with you very quickly and sort of kind of bring things to a close. In Psalm 105, the first two verses, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the peoples, sing to him, sing praises to him, speak of all of his wonders." There's something that happens in Hebrew parallelism, Hebrew poetry, and that is that typically, very often, there is a line of the poem said or of the statement made, and the second line restates the message of the first line, except in different words. And what's interesting to me about Psalm 105 is he says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord and call upon his name." And then he sort of restates that by saying, "Make known his deeds among the people." The same thing happens in Psalm 9. Psalm 9 and verse 1. "I give thanks to the Lord with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonders." What that says is that the Hebrews, the Jewish people, especially their Jewish poetry, illustrates that when they thought about thanking God, that one of the ways in which they expressed thanks to God was to talk about his wonders, was to tell other people about the good things that he has done. And I would suggest to you that that needs to be one of the ways in which we give thanks to God. That we give thanks to God by speaking of him to this world. That we tell others about his wonders. That we make known his deeds among the people. And as we think about things that we have to give thanks for this year, right on the heels of this opportunity that I've had, which I know is a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to talk to other people about the gospel. Let's all recognize that one of the things that we have to be thankful for is what God has done for us. And let's express our thankfulness to God by not just saying, "Thank you, Father," but by telling other people about the wonderful things that he's done. We're trying to lead you as elders in this congregation to be a light in this community. We would like to be the place from which a light goes out, that the people around us can see that there's something different about those folks there. That those folks don't just come and go through some rituals of worship, but those people are devoted to God, that they're devoted to his son, Jesus Christ. And they're changed people who have been changed by the blood of Christ. And it's reflected in the fact, not just in the way that they live, but in what they talk about. I want us to give thanks to God for all of the wonders that he has given us by encouraging you to tell other people about God's wonders, to tell other people about the wonderful things that he has done. And there's nothing that he has done that is more great than the way in which he has worked things out through human history and biblical history to bring about the Messiah who paid the debt that we could not pay, paid for our sins, and we have benefited from that. We benefit in this country from so many, many things. There's not anybody in this audience that I know of who can't read. We all read. There's not anybody in this audience that I know of that doesn't have a Bible. We all have access to a Bible. And we have many things that make living here easy. And we have time. Most of us have good jobs, but sometimes we get so busy with other things that we don't really make our priorities right. And we get too busy with other things so that we don't have time to study the Word and share the Word with other people. But let's be a people who are truly thankful to God for what He's done for us. And let us express that thanks, not just as we gather to praise Him in song, or as we stand with one another, or even by ourselves and give thanks to Him in prayer. But let us also thank Him, show how much we thank Him by telling other people about it. That's what this trip to Sierra Leone enabled me to do, was it gave me an opportunity to tell other people about God. And I want us to do that here, because we don't have to go to Sierra Leone to tell other people about God. We've got lots of folks around here that need to know about the wonders of God and what He's done for us, especially what He's done for us in Jesus Christ. So I'm encouraging us to do that. We're going to be singing a song now in just a minute. Here we are, but straying pilgrims. I think that's the one we're having, isn't that right, Steve? And we are pilgrims, folks. This is not where we belong. We talked about this last week. Let's remember that we belong somewhere else. Our citizenship is in heaven. But as we are pilgrims, let us live lives that please the Lord, that reflect our appreciation. Let us tell other people about Him. And if there's something that we can help you do so that you can be right with the Lord, we'd like to do that if we can.